Welcome, everyone, to the 7th Annual Building a Competitive U.S. Mexico Border Conference, which the Mexico Institute is again delighted to co-sponsor with the Border Trade Alliance. I'm Andrew Rudman. I'm the director of the Mexico Institute. It's been my pleasure to collaborate with the Border Trade Alliance on today and tomorrow's program. This has traditionally been an in-person event where a large delegation from the border region would come to Washington, D.C. We couldn't do that this year for obvious reasons, unfortunately, but we did want to be sure that another year didn't go by before we highlighted the important challenges and opportunities that exist for the U.S.-Mexico border region. I certainly don't need to tell those of you who are from the border region how important cross-border relationships are to your daily lives, to your personal and professional lives, for work and for play. And we're pleased to be able to highlight these relationships and over the next 2 days, discuss potential policies that would allow the region to make an even greater contribution to the prosperity of both countries. One of the advantages of a virtual platform is that we have participants joining us from across the hemisphere. So thank you to everybody who has joined for your interest in the U.S.-Mexico border. And we have a very dynamic group of speakers joining us over the next 2 days. And during the panels and keynote presentations, we'll explore the impact of the pandemic on the border, both in terms of health and economics, and we'll highlight the lessons learned that could help ensure that we're better prepared for future pandemics or black swan events that may disrupt the border. In my view, and perhaps one shared by many of you, we have to learn from this experience and have candid conversations about what went well and what we could do better in the future. I'm delighted now to hand the floor over to our co-sponsor and co-organizer, Britton Mullen, the president of the Border Trade Alliance. Without the help of Britton and her team, we could not have done this week's event. So Britton, thank you, and Garrick and Amanda for all your great work and collaboration. Now over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining today. We have an outstanding 2-day program planned for you. My name is Britton Mullen, as Andrew mentioned, and I am the president for the U.S. Border Trade Alliance. While we prefer to be with you in person, we are appreciative to you, Andrew, and Olivia, and Cicely, and Duncan on your team and at the Wilson Center for allowing us to have this virtual format. As we return to the topic this year of how we can build a more competitive U.S.-Mexico border, we'll be hearing from the cross-border manufacturing community, from border region elected officials, and from economic institutions about how they continue to manage a very disruptive last 18 months and what the future might have to store. We're also looking forward to learning lessons from the northern border, a topic we'll explore tomorrow. But first, it's my pleasure to welcome our good friend, a compassionate leader, and a frequent guest at this annual conference, Congressman Cuellar. We all know Congressman Cuellar as an outspoken advocate for the entire U.S.-Mexico border region, which has kept him especially busy of recent. He's also a true trade champion, something he proved during the successful congressional negotiation over the USMCA. At the conclusion of Congressman Cuellar's remarks, Andrew will facilitate Q&A in the time remaining. We know the Congressman has a lot on his mind when it comes to the border. We always look forward to hearing from him. Congressman Cuellar, thank you for being here today. I turn it to you.
Thank you so much. And Brent, thank you so much for your leadership as the president of the Border Trade Alliance and your passion that you bring and your knowledge that you bring. So I certainly want to say thank you so much to you, Brady, for your leadership. Andrew, also, thank you. The Wilson Center, Mexico's Institute is a source of information and information for policies and ideas. So I certainly want to thank you all very much for this. And I want to thank all of y'all for being here. And hopefully, Britton and Andrew, next time we're together, I hope that we can do this in person. But in the meanwhile, wear your mask and get vaccinated, if I can say that. PSA. Look, the border, I live in the border, and I always say there's an appropriations. I sit on Homeland as the vice chair. I sit on Defense, Approps, and Ag. And I always say this, I don't visit the border, I live at the border. So I see all the dynamics, whether it's trade, tourism, retail, and of course, the illegal migration that we see right now. So it's a multi-dimensional type of situation that we see there. And I think over the years, I see this, that as we get challenges on the border, our institutional relationship with Mexico will be tested, but we see that it's still very strong. And it's not because of government, but it's basically because of the private sector and what y'all do. So to all of y'all, whether you're in the private sector or in some sort of governmental agency, I certainly want to say thank you so much for what you do. I want to just talk about a couple of things because I do want to get into questions and answers. So first of all, as I mentioned, very dynamic. We're facing different things. People say the border's closed, but as you know, my personal opinion is, the border is open to undocumented aliens coming in with all due respect. When you get thousands of people coming in, for example, in the last 3 weeks in the Rio Grande Valley, we've had about 65,000 people that have come in at the lower Rio Grande Valley. But then when you talk about, and that's a system that I think we're all compassionate, but I think we need to follow the law when it comes to border security. I've always said this, that we believe in legal migration. We just don't believe in illegal migration. So that's one dynamic. The other dynamic is, of course, our border restrictions that we see. That is before the pandemic, that we would see over 18 million Mexicans that would come and spend over $19 billion in the US. And as you know, there's a lot of contradictions. We get undocumented aliens are able to come in regardless of the health issues that are brought up. But when it talks about having the legal visa holders that the Mexicans are, they can't come in through land. So that's one contradiction. And of course, the other contradiction is that they can fly in. So if you're in Monterrey, if you want to come through Laredo, you can't do it through the land bridge. But if you get in a plane, you can fly into San Antonio or Houston. So there are different contradictions. And this is something I've told the administration they need to fix that. We've seen what Canada is opening up to Americans come in, and we'll see what happens with all this. And I hope that the Canadian border is not open by itself, and we do it at the same time with the Mexican border once we do that. So that's one dynamic that we're seeing. And of course, trade, essential trade, even though I call tourism and retail essential also, but the essential part of it, that's going. And it's been increasing, and a lot of it is just simply because of the new NAFTA, what I call the NAFTA 2.0. It's working. We do have issues with Mexico on some issues. I don't think they're following what they're supposed to be doing. I'm sure that the Mexicans have complaints about the Americans also, but there are some things, the way they treat the energy companies and other industry, that I think we need to spend time so we can put together and make sure we're on the same page on that. As I mentioned, there are a lot of things that I try to do in the appropriations. There is a bill that I know we're still working with the Border Trade Alliance, but I'm telling you, we're going to get this done one way or the other, is the Land Port of Entry Modernization Trust Fund. And we want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable, but I'm telling you that my intent is to get it done, and I want to do it with your input. Why is it that seaports get all this extra assistance, or even airports? There's a harbor maintenance trust fund, but if you look at most of the goods and people that come into the United States, they don't come through seaports or land port or airports. They come through land ports, and I think we need to have a steady source of funding. And again, I ask all of y'all, please work with me, because it is my intent to get this done, and I certainly need your input on that. Other things that I added on the appropriations, for example, I added language that directs the State Department to develop a strategy for bolstering cooperation with Mexico and Canada on a supply chain resiliency. And that is important because I think we saw that we were just too dependent on Canada, on the Chinese. And we certainly need to make sure that this chain supply resiliency is strengthened between the U.S. and Mexico. And I certainly want to thank some of the folks, Sergio and other folks from our Mexican investors, companies. Certainly want to thank them for that idea and the language that we work together. We have worked on language also to add monies in technology to our ports, monies to do more ports construction. But ports are done. This is why I push the trust fund. Is ports are like the courthouses. If anybody have seen or understand the way we fund courthouses, we do one at a time, maybe two at a time. But we have so many needs that we need to have something that's bigger, stronger, and better to get this done. But we have put in monies, basically taking the money away from the wall and put it for technology and for port itself. Added other languages that will get us to look at some of the things. For example, I've added language to make sure that in the agriculture, that we work with them to develop strategies on improving the efficiency of the agriculture inspection process and trade facilitation. That is important because we certainly know what the ag means to that area. Certainly put language there asking GSA to appoint a border infrastructure coordinator where they will work along with CBP, GSA, the Department of Transportation. So whenever we do construction, we can coordinate this a lot more itself also. Finally, the NAT Bank is something that is key. I had a bill, we added it to the trade agreement, the NAFTA 2.0, and now we have recapitalized and we're doing a lot more for the NAT Bank that I think will be involved a little bit more with roads, hopefully. We'll see what happens in October, November. And certainly some of them have been involved with some of the port or bridges construction that will be key. Finally, I do want to say this to everybody, and there's a lot of other things that I've added, but I want to summarize this. I want to thank BTA and everybody else that was involved with passing the NAFTA 2.0, the U.S. Mexico Canada agreement. That was key because we needed it to just modernize what we did with NAFTA back in the 90s. So I just want to say thank you for all of y'all for working to make sure that we got this passed. We just got to make sure that the way it's implemented, that it doesn't affect in a negative way, especially to some of the American companies that I spend a lot of time in industries that have told me about what's happening or the way the Mexicans are looking at the American companies. And again, I understand, I'm sure the Mexicans have concerns, but we got to keep our communications open. So with that, Britton and Andrew, I want to, I just wanted to highlight some of the things. I just want to be a team player with you. And I certainly want to learn from all of you. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any easy questions that y'all might have.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Congressman. We really appreciate you being here and all the support you've provided for the Mexico Institute and for the border region and the Border Trade Alliance. So really, really delighted to have you kick off our program today. Just a reminder for our audience, you can ask questions, easy questions, I believe, either by emailing to mexico@wilsoncenter.org or tag us on Twitter @Mexico Institute. Congressman, you're in your district, or certainly have been traveling around in your district. Maybe could we start off, give us a sense of how your constituents are managing the pandemic, both in terms of the economic and the health side, if you would.
Well, right now I'm happen to be in Houston, tomorrow I'll be in my district. But right. Look, in the district itself, it's interesting, the border communities, as an example, we're doing a better job at vaccinating than the state average and the national average. We were doing a good job. And right now what we're seeing, of course, cases go up like we're seeing them in different areas. And about 90, at least in my area, almost 90, 87% of the people that are getting sick are the unvaccinated ones. So this is why I keep saying, get your vaccines. I was with I mentioned I was with the military in Alaska, and I was talking to the soldiers, and you had the younger soldiers that had just come in, you had the older soldiers, the commanders. And when I asked them questions about the vaccines, the older soldiers said, hey, I took my vaccine, let's go ahead and move on. The younger soldiers, it was interesting, they were saying, well, I read, and I said, the internet, yes, sir. I read that, there are some problems, and I read this and all that. So it's fascinating how the social media has impacted some of the younger folks from taking this, besides, some of the older folks that have certain ideological leanings. But the other thing is, I told the soldiers this, look, I understand that, but I said, look, when I was growing up, and I think some of us remember this, if you were gonna go to school, you had to take your polio shot, you had to take your tetanus, you had to take your measles, you had to take the other shots, and you took them to go to school. And we are in different times, and at least for the military, as you know, by September 15th, they're going to be mandating vaccines for our soldiers. But we are in different times. But we've seen this in my district that people have done this. But one thing that we're seeing in my district is we have capacity at the hospitals, but the problem is physical capacity, but there's not enough nurses on it. So therefore we have a lack of capacity. Beds are available because of what we're seeing. And I was talking to my niece who's works here at the big hospital here in Houston, and she was telling me that there is conversation that some of the after effects of COVID might become a situation and something that might be covered. So it's fascinating because we're going through a very difficult time. But again, my district, high vaccination, but it's that small amount of people that haven't been vaccinated, and I think we're seeing that.
Yes, thanks. I think without a doubt, the evidence certainly is suggesting, as you say, that the vast majority of the cases now are the unvaccinated. But speaking of the vaccines, the U.S. Made a donation to Mexico specifically to increase vaccination rates in the border region on the Mexican side of the border. Some reports suggest that almost all eligible residents on the Mexican side have been vaccinated. Given that, do you have a sense of when the Biden administration might open the border to non-essential travel, which you mentioned in your opening comments, and particularly, I think, important, what might be the criteria for making that decision? Because I think the uncertainty is presumably one of the biggest problems for all of us.
Yeah, and we have provided vaccines, and I think yesterday the VP Harris and the Mexican president were supposed to talk about more vaccines, and I'm sure the U.S. is going to provide more vaccines. I can tell you that border communities have been there in their fair share. For example, in Laredo, we have a flight because, as you know, they don't let Mexicans come in through land ports, but they can fly in. So we have Aeromexico Aeromar that flies in from Mexico a couple times a week, 2-3 times a week. And you have Mexicans that come in, and we have foreign vaccinations. That is, they come in, get their shot, and they fly back over there. Some of the border communities have worked with them to get some maquiladora workers and other people vaccinated. So we've seen some of this done. But to answer your question, when are we going to open this up? I always say this is the United States of America. And we got to find a way. I've talked to name the folks, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the secretary, both secretaries, the last one and then this one current right now. And I've talked to CDC, and it was interesting because Homeland would put the blame to CDC. When I would talk to CDC, they would say, they would pass it the other way around. CDC, when I asked them, why is it that we can't get people either vaccinated or checked at the border like we do airports? Mexicans can fly in, but they can't drive in. And their answer was, it's complicated. And without due respect, that shows me that they don't understand the border. It's not complicated. You can always find a way to address it. Let the local people find a way to address it. To answer your question, I hope soon, because what's happening is I don't think the administration understands the impact of the economic impact. There are businesses, if you look at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, it will tell you that in Laredo, for example, some businesses depend 40, 50, or maybe even higher percent on just the Mexican shoppers. As I mentioned at the beginning, before the pandemic, over $19 billion were spent in the US. So the border communities, and tomorrow I'll walk the streets of Laredo by the bridge with a national reporter, anchor, and people just don't understand the way our businesses have just been devastated. And Washington doesn't understand this, the way this has been devastated. Our people, it's not only the small business owners, but think about all those employees that used to work for them. And it's not only that, but think about the family members. You can't see family members because, as you know, on the border, you got primos and primas on both sides of the border, and they haven't seen each other for a long time. So I wish that the border would. I wish the administration would understand this. I had a way that we were going to open this up under Trump. I had worked with Mark Morgan. I had worked with Secretary Wolf, but then after the president lost the election in November, it kind of all went away. So hopefully the Biden administration will understand why it's important.
Thanks. Let's sort of, if we could stay on that topic, but looking forward, do you see a role for Congress in pandemic preparedness, for example, ensuring that there are more clear guidelines and metrics for when a closure would be justified and when an opening would be justified? Because as I mentioned before, I think one of the big challenges is people literally waiting on the 19th of each month to see whether the border will open on the next day. And you certainly can't plan for business that way.
Yeah, and I think, I think Secretary Wolf and especially CBP Commissioner Mark Morgan, we got it. They got it. And, we worked and we developed a plan to have a face in. And like I said, it was going to happen until President Trump lost the election. Then everything changed after that. But they were moving toward that direction. We had a face in. Actually, Senator Cornyn and myself, we added language in the appropriations in December, but the administration has not followed it. But we exactly asked them, hey, tell us your metrics, be more transparent. Tell us how you're going to open up the border, because right now we're working in a void. Nobody understands what they're doing. They don't listen to the people at the border. And I'm not talking about myself, but I'm talking about the businessmen, the county judges, the sheriffs, the mayors, the folks at the businesses at the border. And so there's no, as you mentioned, the key is there's no metrics. When do we know it's going to open? We're just at a whim of the administration. And I wish that the administration would understand this. And every time I talk to the secretary, I've told them, and without due respect, they give me answers that doesn't really make sense. And I'll be with him on Thursday and I'll talk to him again and see what he says. I think I get more information, quite honestly, from the Mexican government. I do my WhatsApp with the highest official there, Marcelo Ebrard, and we communicate with each other. And I think I get more information from the Mexicans than the Americans, which shows you that there's a lack of transparency, a lack of metrics with this administration when it comes to border crossings.
Without a doubt, and thank you, sir, for doing that. We appreciate all your hard work and efforts. I think there's no doubt that raising the issue is what has to happen in order for people to appreciate it. It's one of the purposes of this border conference all along has been to increase awareness of the border in Washington, D.C., as well as in Mexico. So I'm delighted that you're engaging with Foreign Minister Ebrard and talking to folks here. We appreciate it. I want to be respectful for your time. I have lots more questions in my mind. I'm sure Britton does and others do, but we promised that we would let you go at the bottom of the hour. So I think rather than asking a question that would be hard to answer in 20 seconds, I won't do it. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it and look forward to future conversations.
Thank you, Congressman.
Andrew and Bryn, thank you so much. And to all of y'all, thank you. And thank you so much for what y'all do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move into our next panel. And to do that, I have the pleasure to introduce my colleague, my predecessor, and I hope most importantly, my friend Duncan Wood, the Vice President for Strategy and New Initiatives here at the Wilson Center, and Duncan will moderate our next session.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's great to be with you. Congratulations to you and Britain for organizing another great event. I am delighted to be able to moderate this panel on manufacturing at the border. I'm currently based in Vancouver, British Columbia, where I'm actually doing some field research about the land and air border between Canada and the United States, which provides for a very interesting comparison. I know there's going to be a panel tomorrow on looking at the Canadian experience. I'm so happy that we can get this event going again. I'd like to echo Congressman Cuellar's desire that we get together in person for this event next year. One of the great strengths of this event has always been that we bring folks from the border along with their expertise to Washington. And not only do they talk to folks here in Washington, but they talk to each other. And that's one of the most dynamic aspects of this event, which I think that sadly we're going to miss out on as long as we're doing it virtually. So we can't do it physically this year, but we do have two experts with us today who can speak with great authority about the challenges faced by manufacturing in the border region during COVID and provide us with some insights into the future. Let me introduce the first of those experts, Kathy Neal. Kathy is the Global Trade Compliance Director at the Regal Beloit Corporation. She's worked at the intersections of commerce, customs, and trade for over 35 years. Her expertise includes global supply chains, customs regulations, and bilateral trade along and across the U.S. Mexico border. Before assuming her current role, Neal worked as the trade co-chair for the Advisory Committee on Commercial Operations of Customs and Border Protection. She has a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Texas at El Paso, a great place, and was licensed as a customs broker by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Kathy, welcome. Let me also introduce Luis Hernandez. Luis is the current president of Index International, the National Council of the Maquiladora and Export Manufacturing Industry. Index represents the interests of maquilas and export manufacturing companies at the federal level of the Mexican government, while likewise keeping partner companies informed of current industry standards and regulations. Hernandez, or Luis, has built his career as a finance executive with corporate tax, customs compliance, and lean manufacturing expertise. He studied to become a public accountant at the Autónoma de Baja California in Mexicali before obtaining a master's degree in business administration from the Tec de Monterrey and a doctorate in business from Atlantic International University in the United States. Welcome to you, Luis. Let me launch straight in with some questions. I'm going to begin with you, Kathy, if I can. Rather than looking backwards, I wonder if we could sort of look at what the situation is right now, and we can say, how are border travel restrictions impacting your operations as they pertain to manufacturing in northern Mexico? Kathy.
Well, thank you very much, Duncan, and thank you to the Border Trade Alliance and the Wilson Center for hosting the 7th Annual Conference on Building a Competitive U.S. Mexico Border. I'm honored to be part of this esteemed panel. Just to be clear, I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of Regal Beloit Corporation, but I will share comments about the impact of COVID on the cross-border manufacturing industry as a whole. So currently, the current situation, I think we've learned a lot. As Congressman Cuellar mentioned, there's a lot of lessons that we've learned through the COVID pandemic and all of the trials that we've been going through. I think one of the things that we've learned is that we absolutely have to have relationships with trade groups and with authorities, with manufacturing companies, with participants in the trade logistics companies, because those relationships can't be developed during a crisis, right? We have to be able to know who we can call and have developed those relationships and have them in place so that it's much easier to pick up the phone or send an email to the contact that you've already seen every month for the past, 5 years or what have you, rather than trying to figure out who's the right person to call in the middle of some ongoing crisis. I think that you asked about the ban on non-essential travel. The ban is only on non-essential travel by car across the U.S. Mexico border. So our associates that need to fly into any location can arrive without any problem. There's no restriction. So it's kind of incongruous that the people who are closest to the border are not able to travel because they can't drive across the border unless they have a valid reason. And of course, there's a lot of lines and a lot of questions that they have to go through. So it definitely has had an impact on operations along the border for many companies, for many logistics companies, and just for many companies in general.
Wonderful, thank you, Kathy. If I can turn to Luis, sort of a variation on that question, Luis. How is it that the successful movement of goods across the border has been helped by some of the protocols that have been put in place? One of the things that's been commented on a number of times is that when the border was closed, one of the great successes was that, of course, this was a negotiated thing that took place between the governments of Mexico and the United States. It wasn't unilaterally imposed by one side or the other. And that created certain protocols which took into consideration some of the interests of business. And that was very, very important. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation, first of all. Nice being with you all. One of the main items that happened was that we were able to connect with CBP and the Mexican government to understand what is the process flow coming north and south. Okay. What was the situation? We shut down the entities in the States and Mexico. What happened there is that there were certain products, medical products or technical products, automotive products that were required in the U.S. Mexico didn't have this essential category as they have it in the U.S. So what we said, you know what, the company that wants to cross the border with those goods would like to be part of that supply chain in the U.S. So we were allowed to do that. That is one of the items. The second item was, it was partially, we opened up partially. We started with a 25% shipping and going to 40, going to 50. Just as an example, in Tijuana, every day they cross trucks from Mexico to the U.S., around 3,000 trucks. When COVID hit us, we were crossing around 150 trucks a day. Okay, but those were for the essential businesses, very much medicals. So what then we understood is that the economy in the U.S. was still working differently than the one in Mexico. So we were allowed to create a protocols. The protocols included what you do in your site, what you provide, what protocols you provide to the carrier, to the broker, to the person that is giving you the food. So those protocols were kind of lessons learned as we speak, as we were working.
Thank you. It's interesting that both of you point to the importance of the relationships that exist between businesses and between business and government. It's critical that those are maintained, and I have to say that that's one of the things that is so important about this particular event each year, is that we keep that information flow going between the private sector from the border and the governments at the federal level. If we could look ahead, and I'll continue with you, Luis, if I can. We've been shut down now for a year and a half. Is this a sustainable state of affairs? And if not, how do we go about opening back up again?
Let me wrap it up. Let's say manufacturing in Mexico, we're open, let's say, at 80% across the country. We're talking about 6,000 maquiladoras that most of them have reached 50 or more percentage of people vaccinated. So to answer your question, it won't be that sustainable because there are many efforts done internally in the site. As an example, if you will work 2 shifts, right now the company is working 4 shifts because of the safe distancing, because of the protocols that you need to follow. Okay, so that is a high cost for us. Let's say companies that we started 500 people, and right now they're running at 750 because of the protocols they need to have and the weekends they need to work. Okay, so cost-wise, that might not be the best scenario and will not be sustainable for more than a year. Another situation that we're facing is that the economy has hit us. Okay, we're expecting an inflation of like 6%. That inflation will hit us as well in the manufacturing side. So what we'll see is that inflation across the supply chain, that everybody will be passing the buck from one to another. So it won't be sustainable as well. What is sustainable right now is that we were able to prove that productivity is our biggest, or say, our biggest threat or best ally. Okay, the situation is that if you're productive, there are companies in the home or retail business that they grew a lot. Okay, those companies will be sustainable. But companies in the automotive industry, mostly on that side, the aerospace, will not be able to take another year with this costing.
Thank you, Luis. Kathy, I'm going to come back to you, and obviously feel free to answer that previous question. But what are the lessons that we've learned from all of this in terms of preparing for the next crisis? Because sadly, most of us recognize that this is not going to be the last pandemic that we have to face. And we've had a number of pandemics in the past, and we've come up with North American pandemic preparedness plans that, in the case of COVID, really didn't help us that much in terms of the public health aspects. But we do seem to have been prepared for the border closure. What can we learn from our experience over the last 18 months in terms of how we can improve that performance for the next pandemic?
So thank you for the question. I think that as we've all said, the relationship, we can't overemphasize the importance of having those relationships with the authorities between the trade groups and the various authorities in place. Those are absolutely essential. And I'll tell you that one of the things that many companies face is that in long periods of no crisis, right? When we start relaxing and we think, oh, this is going to be this way forever. We're not going to see any issues. So why do I need to invest the time in going to these monthly meetings or, meeting with these people when maybe what they talk about for 5 minutes impacts my operation? What is in it for me? Well, what's in it for you is that at the end of the day, when we do have a crisis like we're facing now, you know who to call, you have the relationships in place, and it's much easier to react. So that's number one, is absolutely we have to have those relationships in place. What we have found is that the supply chain is very fragile in some cases. I think that especially as companies become more global and manufacturing becomes more global, we're sourcing and companies are sourcing components from all over the world. So how do we get those components into the hands of the people who need them to make the next product, whatever that may be? Those supply chains have to be evaluated. I think anything that we can do to make border crossing easier, more efficient, is something that we need to focus on. I'm very excited about Congressman Cuellar's Land Border Infrastructure Trust Fund. I think that would be just such a huge benefit to companies who have to cross the U.S. Mexico border on a regular basis. I think that the 21 CCF, I'm forgetting what CCF stands for, but the 21st Century Framework is something that we have to look at as well. What can we do to make the whole information exchange process more efficient, so that when I'm sending information as a shipper, if I'm sending data elements about my particular shipment, what can I do to make that same data package available to all of the countries that shipment is going to flow through until it gets to its final destination? So I'm not having to resubmit and to hire a new broker and to experience all the delays that I'm experiencing today. So I think there's a number of actions like that that are so critical to just the smooth flow of trade. Another big push that I think we need to continue is for unified cargo processing on the U.S. Mexico border. We've had a lot of success with that at certain ports, but it really needs to be implemented across, all of the ports, not just in the certain ones where it already exists. I think, the focus on allowing customs brokers in Mexico to represent their to clear products in more than 5 ports. Right now, I believe the limit is still 5 ports. A customs broker can only clear shipments at 5 ports. That's got to be lifted, and I think that was included in one of the USMCA provisions. So those actions that we can take to facilitate trade are going to be the most critical.
Thank you, Kathy. I'd like to build off something you just said. You talked about, we've learned so much about the fragility and resilience of supply chains over the past 18 months. And the sort of the partner conversation to that is what we've learned about the dependence on China in a time when we're experiencing deep conflict at the economic level between China and the United States. And of course, Canada and Mexico as USMCA partners to the United States sharing that huge land border have suddenly become a lot more important in the supply chain conversation. So I'd like to sort of put a little bit of a spin on this, which is to say, the challenges that we've seen in supply chains over the last 18 months, the reaffirmed importance of the border, in what way is that an opportunity for manufacturing in the border region? U.S. firms in Mexico, but also firms from all over the world who are looking at the border region. Let's start with you, Kathy, and I'll go back to Luis.
Thanks. That's a great question, Duncan. I think that one of the things that we need to look at is how can we reduce the cost to manufacturers and to the consumers ultimately by leveraging near sourcing. And there's a lot of terms that get thrown around like near sourcing, near manufacturing. If we can manufacture goods close by, closer to the marketplace where they're going to be sold, then obviously we need to keep less inventory. And right now you hear about all of these companies that are having to increase their inventory. And so there's no warehouse space available. There's no containers available. So it puts a further strain on the supply chain. So I think that it's a huge opportunity for companies to look at manufacturing in U.S., Mexico, Canada, and consider the cost of inventory when you're doing your cost analysis of where it makes sense to do your manufacturing. Consider not only freight costs, not only sourcing costs, not only labor costs, but also the cost of keeping that inventory on hand just to buffer your supply chain concerns that you may have.
Thanks, Kathy. Before I go over to Luis, let me just remind our audience that you can send questions to our Twitter feed at Mexico Institute or to our email address, mexico@wilsoncenter.org. Luis, over to you. How do you see this opportunity for the near and medium term in terms of North America, Mexico in particular, providing the alternative to global supply chains?
That's a great question. First of all, let me start with there's a fact here is that the sourcing process in Mexico is not one of the best because most of the raw materials are in Asia. Okay, we're talking about cotton, insulation, we're talking about steel, insulation, plastics, and resin are in Asia. Where we are good, and that is a conference that I just gave a few weeks ago, we're good at the speed of the market that we have. Okay? We're better than many other countries because we know how to manufacture. We have, let's say, the knowledge out of the people. That is one of the items. Number two is what we're finding out right now is that many companies are saying, you know what, I might be paying for a product from China $1. Okay, if I do a sourcing locally, I will be paying $1.30, $1.50. But as Kathleen said, you know what is the cost of my inventory? What is the risk that I have? Okay, what is the sourcing process that I will create? And then with that cost, can I qualify as a USMCA product? So that is a key element that we need to identify. It's not very much getting the goods from Asia that are cheaper, because there is a value add process that you need to apply in order to qualify as an USMCA product. Another of the topics that we're seeing is that, it's an example. from April 2020 to April 2021, we created in Mexico, just in manufacturing, 180,000 jobs. That is a lot of jobs created. Why is that? Because what the companies are doing is they're trying to do, let's say, be more robust on the supply chain. You know what? I had inventory over there. I'll have it here. If I get a contract with a 3PL. So what is happening right now is, in order to say, supply for the insourcing of products, we're working more forward, getting the goods here, finalizing the job that was supposed to be done in our countries, and you still have it here as a raw material. That is something that we're seeing right now. And in the future, what we see is that the PMI, the Purchasing Manager Index, is still growing, is still over 50. So that will continue for the next quarter. So we're expecting more insourcing locally. And I think we all have heard about the ally showing. That means that not everything will be coming into Mexico, from China to Mexico. A lot of those products will be coming from China directly to the U.S. and they will be manufactured there. So that is some hard factors that we need to understand.
Thank you. Luis, you raised such an important point. And the Wilson Center is currently running a major initiative looking at the United States supply chains. And one of the comments that we've heard so many times from the stakeholders that we're consulting with is that it's very, very difficult in certain business lines to set up, let's say, manufacturing facilities or let's say mines in the extractive industries, based upon the idea that there is a demand for a product, when it's not just that there's a demand, but there's a demand for a product at a certain price. And global competition, is such that if you're undercut by, a couple of cents, you might see that your outlets for your goods or your raw materials disappear overnight. And all of those billions of dollars you've sunk into your either your factory or your resource base, they're all of a sudden, just lying there idle. This is one of the things I think we really need to talk about in the North American context, which is that if Canada and Mexico are going to be seen as reliable suppliers, then maybe there needs to be much more of a premium placed upon the factor of reliability, security of supply. And that's something that the three governments, I think, need to work very closely on. Let me come back to the question of infrastructure, because it's so important in a lot of these conversations. And Luis, you talked about, some of the raw materials that are coming in from other parts of the world, in particular from Asia. This means that the ports on the Pacific side of Mexico are essentially should be seen as being ports for North America. They're not just Mexican ports, they're ports for the North American economy, because those goods that come in there feed into what we used to call the NAFTA highways. I guess they're now the USMCA highways, and begin to feed into the productive integrated manufacturing platform of North America. How can we think about this, Luis, in terms of fully integrating the sea borders of Mexico with the land border between the United States and Mexico?
That's a good question. And first of all, yes, we need to look at the ports for Mexico as part of the USMCA. It's not a Mexico-US situation or Canada. If we are together on this, so we need to find out what we can do. I think we are very well versed on crossing the border, crossing the goods by land. Okay, we are not good on crossing the goods by sea, and we are not good on crossing the goods by train. Okay, so talking about sea and train, what we need to, I think we need to work more hardly between CBP, Homeland Security, with the Mexico authorities to understand how do you audit that. Okay, because you can go by, let's say, Ensenada, which is close to Long Beach. Okay? When Long Beach has an issue, they go to Ensenada. The situation with Ensenada is that the capacity-wise, they are already packed. Okay? If you go to Manzanillo, we are having the same situation. We don't have the infrastructure there, and we need to either create, say, the processes or have this kind of a bidding process to grow it, because if we are not able to capture everything in the US, we need to capture that in Mexico. What we're seeing as well is that compliance-wise, CBP has created a lot of controls, almost zero controls, but assuming that everything will be shipped by land. What we're seeing right now is a lot of the companies from either Baja, Juarez, but they are trying to ship it directly.
I can no longer hear you, Luis. I don't know whether it's just my end, but you seem to have gone on mute from my perspective. But somebody tell me if that's not true. Maybe it could just be my reception here.
Either. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, your sound has disappeared, Luis. Okay, Luis, while we're trying to sort that out, let me go over to Kathy, and feel free to chime in on the question of sort of integrating the infrastructure projects of North America's borders. But also, let me just put this rather fun question to you. If you were in charge of the U.S.-Mexico border for the next 6 months, what are the 3 things that you would do there that would drive forward productivity of the USMCA region?
Oh, that's a very good question. So if I was, let's see, the queen of the border for the next 6 months, I would certainly implement unified cargo processing at every port. One stop, shipments get cleared, one stop and you're out. Definitely, as I mentioned before, the data stream, having combined data streams so that I only have to send my data one time, and my export from Mexico is the same data as my import to the US and vice versa. I think that would be so impactful on traders. There's a lot of ideas that are coming out of the 21 CCF, the 21st Century Customs Framework, that are really going to be very impactful if they're able to be implemented. So that includes the data stream, that includes the processing. They have not talked about unified cargo processing so far. It's just been the data streams. But there's a lot of processes that are currently in place that people along the border just think, well, this is the way we've always done it, so we're going to keep doing it this way. And I think that we need to take a new look and say, a lot of these companies cross hundreds or millions of dollars worth of products per day, per week, per month. They are trusted traders. Let's treat them as trusted traders. Let's let them cross with just a packing list. They don't have to do a full entry. They can do a consolidated entry both ways at the end of the period, whether it's a week, a month, whatever that period is. Make the transactions less burdensome on the trade.
Thank you, Kathy. Luis, I think we've got your audio back now. Apologies for that. Please finish up what you were saying, but also let me put that same question to you. If you were in charge of the US-Mexico border, what are the 3 things you'd do?
Yeah, okay. Finalizing the sea situation, what we're seeing is that the more let's say we talk about this with the U.S. government, the more we talk about it with the companies that need it, the more effective it will be. Okay? It is not a government situation. It is the companies requesting the service to provide and comply with the USMCA. Okay, and that is just pretty much asking. That we're finding out on COVID is that there were some questions that were never asked. Okay, if you open the border for non-essential. So right now, I think that is the moment to start asking those questions, and then finalizing and creating, let's say, a path not just for now, it's a path for the future. Okay, because we'll be competing against other, say, treaties sooner than later.
Fantastic. Thank you, Luis. Kathy, if I can come back to you for just sort of some final thoughts here. In terms of raising the competitiveness of manufacturing at the border, we talked a lot about the border itself. We've talked a lot about the protocols, but what are the other things that you see really need to happen there? And I'm thinking sort of in the realm of human capital development, education, thinking about the technologies that need to be developed. Where do you see those biggest challenges lying?
I think, again, streamlining the processes is absolutely critical. We have to make it easier for traders to trade, to provide information to the authorities, to make entry, to exchange information back and forth in such a way that's compliant with the regulations in Mexico and the regulations in the US. The talent is there. You know, there's so much talent that decides that they have to leave the border because they're not being fully utilized at those border regions. I think that we have got to focus on providing opportunities for that talent along the borders.
Thank you, Kathy. Kathy, Luis, this has been a terrific conversation. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope that in a year's time, we're going to come back and find that all of our problems have magically disappeared, but I'm sure we'll have plenty of fodder for another conversation of at least half an hour next year. With that, I'm going to turn the microphone back over to Andrew Rubman. Andrew, for a great conversation on how do we strengthen cross-border communities. Over to you.
Great. Duncan, thank you. And thanks to the panel that just concluded, really some great comments and insights. So thank you so much. And we are now, as Duncan mentioned, going to shift gears to talk about how to strengthen cross-border communities with some lessons learned. I'm delighted to introduce our panel, starting with San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria. We also have Maria Julia Marinison, the health attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico and the acting head on the U.S. side of the Border Health Commission, and Farid Hanan, the Director of Economic Affairs within the Undersecretariat for North America at the Foreign Ministry at SRE. We had hoped that Tijuana Mayor Carla Ruiz would be able to join us, but unfortunately, due to demands from her office that is in exercising her responsibility, she was unable to join us this afternoon, hopefully on a future event. Full bios of these three panelists and all our speakers are available on our event webpage. So I'd encourage you to look there to read more about our great assembled panel. And I want to thank this panel for joining us. We're really happy to have you with us to talk about the impact of and the response to the pandemic at both the municipal and federal levels. I think we'll start off. I'll ask each of our panelists a general question, give them a few minutes, maybe 4 or 5 minutes to make some initial comments, and then we'll have some follow-up questions, including questions from the audience. So if you'd like to pose a question to any of our panelists, again, please either email it to mexico@wilsoncenter.org or tag us on Twitter @Mexico Institute. So let's begin. Mayor Gloria, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. You assumed office in the midst of the pandemic. Could you share with us the measures that the city of San Diego adopted since you took office to address COVID, both on the economic and the health side, and how you might have collaborated with other levels of government in doing so, and with your counterpart in Tijuana?
Happy to, Andrew, and thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to be here today. And I'm very sorry that my friend Carla Ruiz cannot join us today. She is absolutely delightful. She's a historic figure. She's the first woman to lead her city, and she's concluding her time in office a little later this year. So I think you understand a little more the pressures of the time, and I'm happy to represent our binational mega region on her behalf as well. We work very well together, and she's, again, just delightful. To your question, Andrew, yes, I had the happy coincidence of being elected in November 2020. Nothing like winning an election in the middle of a pandemic. And I've taken a slightly different approach than my predecessor, and both the economic and on the health side of things. The health side's a little bit easier. First executive order that I issued was for the enforcement of our public health order. Previous to my administration, these were kind of guidelines, maybe helpful suggestions, but you can think when I was sworn in December, remember where we were in terms of infection rates, hospitalization, and whatnot. We really didn't have the luxury of simply suggesting to people that maybe it'd be a good idea to follow the health orders. And so, with a great deal of controversy going out and enforcing the city's curfew, its prohibition on indoor dining, the wearing of masks, etc., it was difficult to do that, but ultimately it was effective, right? The following the public health order and the introduction of vaccines shortly thereafter, brought down our infection rates substantially, and became a situation where just a couple of days ago we reopened our convention center for the first time in a year and a half, welcoming conventioneers back to San Diego. And so the health approach was very much about following data and science, enforcing the rules that were issued to us by the county and the state, and trying to use my relationships as a former congressional staffer, as a former state legislator, and a former county employee to make sure that my city was, firing all cylinders on what is probably the largest challenge that we'll have for a century. On the economic perspective, because we're able to get infections down, we're successful in helping pass the American Rescue Plan in Washington, we went from a situation, Andrew, where my initial thought was that I was going to have to cut somewhere on the order of $200+ million out of our city's budget. That would have been roughly 1/5 of our general fund. You could imagine how devastating those impacts would have been had we had to do that. We didn't have to do that because President Biden, with strong assistance from the Congress, was able to pass the Relief Rescue Plan and send us a significant sum of money. What I've chosen to do, Andrew, is to invest those in neighborhoods. Just yesterday, we launched our Small Business and Nonprofit Relief Grant Fund, taking $10 million of those federal dollars, marrying it with $2 million in private philanthropic funding, and then putting it out to businesses and nonprofits that continue to struggle within the city of San Diego. The application for that goes live tomorrow, and I've just shameless plug, sdreliefgrant.com for affected San Diego businesses and nonprofits. But I think that's an example to your question of working on an intergovernmental level, working with our partners in the federal government to balance our city's budget, and then to take what dollars we have left over to make smart investments in the community. So everything from these relief grants I mentioned to robust youth programming in our city. Our children have been learning on Zoom for a year, and we, as school concluded back in May and June, having our libraries open, our rec centers well programmed, partnering with arts organizations in our cities to make sure that if you go to the park, chances are there could be a traveling circus or an arts and culture program there to greet you. Keep our children occupied and send them back to school next month, hopefully with a really enriching experience, try and make up for some of that learning loss. I could go on all day, and I know we have other great panelists, so I don't want to do that. Suffice to say, we've tried to rigidly adhere to the public health order, enforced it as appropriate, use our city firefighters and lifeguards to actually vaccinate 80,000 people, and then use our limited resources from the federal government to invest in what I have to call it Back to Work SD or Back to Work San Diego, a menu of things where we're trying to make investments to get the city off of its knees financially, get our unemployment rate back down. We had a historically low one prior to the pandemic. Now ours is about the same as the national government. And we have a lot of work to do. And this is where I will wrap up by just saying, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, for God's sakes, what are you waiting for? Please get vaccinated. It is our quickest path to ending this pandemic and being able to go back to what I love doing, which is working with Mayor Ruiz and figuring great ways to work in our binational mega region to expand our economies and improve the lives of both of our people.
Thanks. That's a great message. I'm sure the pitch for vaccine rang happily in Maria Julia's ears as a health professional. So maybe I'll turn to you, Maria Julia, and ask you to comment a little bit on how the U.S. federal government has worked with Mexico to respond to the initial and sustained impacts of the pandemic, particularly obviously from the health side, including perhaps the recent conversation between the vice president and the president just yesterday.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew, for this invitation. And what an honor to be here with Major Gloria and Farid Hanan, a close colleague here in Mexico. So I guess, which is, as you know, we have a high-level delegation from the United States government visiting Mexico today and meeting with the president of Mexico and also senior level authorities. And in one prior conversation, let's just reflect on comments that people made in terms of Mexico being the first or the second largest country for us in terms of exports and commerce, and the fact that our security and our economic prosperity is totally bound to one another. And I want to reflect on the fact that our health and health security is the same. And without health and health security, there's no economic or security or prosperity that we can talk of. We depend on the health of our populations to move forward as societies. And COVID definitely has posed a huge challenge. As always, health issues get intertwined with a bunch of other issues like politics and economical issues, as you very well know. But I have to say that on the health sector, we have had the luxury of working together for many years by now. We started, at least in my own experience, we started working very, very closely with Mexico on health security matters under the Security and Prosperity Partnership of North America, which you may remember, Andrew. That was part of the President Bush administration. And then when President Obama came, we had the North American Leaders Summit. And under the North American Leaders Summit, we review and relaunch the North American Plan for Animal and Pandemic Influenza. And back at the time when we launched this cross-sectorial framework, trilateral framework, to work along the health and security, the agricultural and the diplomatic sectors to prepare our region for pandemics, I think it was a great testament of the desire of the three countries to work together and the recognition that we had to work together. So we have a long-standing history of collaboration. We've been working with our Mexican and our Canadian colleagues on improving and strengthening our surveillance systems, on a myriad of exercises to export and import medical countermeasures in terms of emergencies. We have put protocols in place to share samples during emergencies. And of course, there was a lot of work of more than a decade on these topics that allow us to sort of convene immediately and apply everything that we put in place to COVID. Of course, there were a myriad of challenges that sort of, I would say, delay a little bit, if you wish, like a smoother collaboration, and we can talk a lot more during the questions and answers. But I think that backbone of technical collaboration that we have maintained, at least for nearly the last 15 years, is what have allowed us to get together and keep working and share information and share technical assistance. And as a matter of fact, I just finished sharing a puppy call on our serological surveys and seeing how our three countries are doing in terms of incidence of the virus, the similarities, the differences. So again, that technical collaboration, it's been the backbone that allow us to, get on working with COVID, but definitely we can talk more about the challenges now during the questions.
Excellent, thank you. And once again, you're all making my job easy, because that's a great lead-in to a question for Farid, who's been deeply involved in Mexico's efforts to obtain vaccines from a number of countries, including the United States. So maybe, Farid, you could tell us a little bit about that experience, and if you like, any more broader comments about the bilateral cooperation.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good afternoon, everyone. It's such a great honor to be in this event organized by the Mexico Institute. I'm very honored to be sharing this panel with Honorable Todd Gloria, and a big pleasure to share it with Maria Julia, with whom I speak every single day, and it's maybe our favorite part of the day, right, Maria Julia?
Correct, our daily call, as we said.
I'll begin my comments before addressing the access to vaccines with what the Army calls strategy. When you design a plan that antedates a crisis, President López Obrador asked Minister Ebrard at the earliest stage of the pandemic to lead some very specific efforts, especially the ones that had to do with international negotiations and vaccine access. But as you might recall, for that time, there were no vaccines. And experts were saying that it would take at least a year to have an effective vaccine. However, we started conversations with the companies that had serious plans of vaccine development, even if they were still in phase 1, such as Novavax. And after our engagement with Novavax, they realized that Mexico had strong health institutions, and they decided to conduct their phase 3 clinical trial in the US and Mexico. This trial showed that the vaccine was safe and more than 90% effective against symptomatic COVID-19. Mexico feels very proud to have contributed to this scientific development and scientific advancement, and reaffirmed that cooperation between the government and the private sector is key. And more importantly, that this cooperation must happen at the very beginning of an upcoming crisis. Actors must react extremely fast. Of course, Maria Julia helped us a lot throughout this process. And we could also speak about regional supply chain interruptions, the 600 ventilators that the US helped us procure amidst the worst moments of the pandemic, trilateral mechanisms such as NAPAPI that Maria Julia was saying. But let me address your question, Andrew, about the vaccines that the US gave to Mexico. As you know, there have been already 2 big shipments. The first one between March and April that were 2.7 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. And I have to say that this was the first shipment that the President Joe Biden sent abroad. I mean, Mexico was the first country that received a shipment from the US. And the second one was on June 15 with 1.35 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson. Currently, we are almost finishing a third and a fourth shipment. The third one with 3.5 million doses of Moderna, and the fourth one with 5 million doses of AstraZeneca. Actually, yesterday's conversation between President Lopez Obrador and VP Harris started with this item in the agenda. And these vaccines are not only a symbol of our strong friendship, but also a proof that we're part of the same region and that we need from each other. As Maria Julia was saying, there's a theory, I know that there are some scholars joining us today, written by Joseph Nye and Robert Keohane, about complex interdependency, and scholars usually exemplify it with economic dependency. But this time, books will need to include more about global threats, such as virus, to illustrate the idea. Mexico is extremely grateful with the US for their solidarity with us, and we are sure that these vaccines will also benefit the US. In terms of the extent in which the regional supply chains will be reactivated, or the smaller possibility of letting a new variant arise in North America. Let's remember that the possibility of having a new variant, which is resistant to vaccines, still exists. Now, from these vaccine shipments, I would like to highlight 2 points. First, Mexico not only cooperated with the US government and the companies. Let's remember that the AstraZeneca vaccine is being manufactured in Mexico, and that helped a lot in the negotiations when we were speaking about the transfer of title, but also with the civil society. An NGO named Direct Relief collaborated with the Mexican government to bring the J&J vaccines to our territory extremely fast and at the lowest possible cost. So again, thanks to all these actors collaborating together, also FedEx gave us a discount of 75% when we imported the ventilators. We have achieved these results. And second, finishing, President Lopez Obrador sent all these J&J vaccines to the northern border. Mexico believes that the border should be reopened. Strong efforts have been made at the federal and at the local level for this purpose. Another example is that as of August 3rd, 85% of the target population living in Mexican municipalities next to the US border have been vaccinated, and the constant dialogue between Mexico and the US has been critical. Thanks to these working groups, we have shared relevant epidemiological and mobility data and remain confident that the border will be reopened soon. I would really like to share more ideas, but I'll pause here and wait for the round of questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think you've all given us really great responses to kick things off. I'll just remind our viewers, participants, if you'd like to pose a question, mexico@wilsoncenter.org or at Mexico Institute via Twitter. But let me go back to Mayor Gloria, if I could. You've all in different ways, of course, talked about cross-border cooperation. Mayor Gloria, San Diego and Tijuana are famous really as a model around the world, I think, for cross-border collaboration. So maybe you could expand a little bit more on how the two cities have cooperated, particularly we could shift to the economic side, recognizing that there's been certainly an impact on the inability of non-essential travel, particularly coming northbound.
Yeah, I appreciate you knowing that, and certainly the plug for knowing about our binational cooperation here. We really do think of ourselves as a mega region, two countries, but one region. And that has held us in good stead during these challenging times. But Andrew, I have to say, we have an extreme frustration with our federal government's continued limitation of cross-border travel. Limiting as they currently are to only essential crossings is having a serious detrimental impact on the San Diego economy, particularly for our southern neighborhoods of San Ysidro, Otay Mesa, communities, neighborhoods of our city that are literally on the border, who rely on frequent crossings to keep their restaurant open, to keep their store open. We have a San Ysidro Chamber of Commerce who have identified 200 businesses that have closed since the pandemic. These are on the U.S. side and the San Diego side. And we are estimating that the weekly economic hit to our retail sector is on the order of magnitude of $7.5 million. Again, that's a week because of these restrictions. So this is having a real impact on us. And as I mentioned before, absent the American Rescue Plan, our local economy would be devastated. And what I would say is that our economy cannot fully reopen until our border reopens. And so we have been outspoken working with other cities on the American side as well as partners in Mexico to try and elevate this issue and get consideration, certainly from the U.S. government, for reestablishing cross-border travel that is at least declared non-essential. To the other ways we're working, as you heard from my other panelists, cooperation on vaccinations is significant. And this is a part of our argument with our federal partners. The information that Baja is putting forward on terms of vaccination rates basically match what we have here in San Diego County. And so when you understand that, when you understand that you can actually fly from Baja to San Diego without restriction, but you can't do that when you're walking or driving across, you understand kind of how, there's probably a technical term, I'm going to say topsy-turvy, that these current rules seem, and again, how detrimental they are to our economy. But we are partnering on vaccinations because we see that as a way forward. The University of California, San Diego has done an exceptional job working with factories in Baja to provide vaccines and inoculations. I went personally to observe that. I mean, it is as good an operation for vaccinations as I've seen on the US side of the border, and is part of why that vaccine rate has risen so high. We are continuing to move forward on what we believe will be infrastructure projects that will benefit both of our economies. You may know that we are in the process of securing additional support for the creation of a third land port of entry in our county, or in our city, I should say. We call it Otay East. And we actually had an event not long ago with Mayor Ruiz and I and our counterparts in the region standing on the dirt berm out in eastern city of San Diego that will become a major port of entry that will probably be the preferred crossing point for commerce, for trucks taking goods and across the border. That project continues to move forward, and it's something that from a binational perspective, our message in Washington and Mexico City is, we need this prioritized. We're not taking our eye off the ball with the near-term issues around travel restrictions, but continuing to really make commitments to moving forward on the Otay project, as well as cross-border water investments that would reduce transboundary flows that pollute U.S. waters as well as Mexican waters. The federal government, through our most recent USMCA trade agreement, set aside $300 million to invest in these kinds of infrastructure projects. And it is our hope that in the near term, we can come to a binational agreement on which projects to prioritize and start building them. Again, that accrues to the benefit of our economy. So we are still very much in emergency posture, but our collaboration, as Fareed was talking about, in terms of the provision of additional vaccine doses by the U.S. government, I think will go a long way to hopefully eventually convincing the powers that be to resume travel as it normally would be, and doing that on a two-track basis of these longer-term investments that will take what is already a vibrant binational economy and make it even more vibrant, really allow us to compete with other economies all around the globe. What we have here in the San Diego Tijuana region is really special, and the federal partnership on Otay East, the cross-border pollution challenges, this will help us stand out and continue. The last thing, Andrew, I'm sorry if I'm going on so long. There is a bit of good news. We've made the first that we know of bid for binational bid for the World Design Capital in 2024. Traditionally, a city bids for it. We did it in concert with our partners in Tijuana. We're actually a finalist. It's our bid with one other bid for another city that you don't want to know about. But it is my sincere hope that we will win this. We'll know later this year, and that will be another way for our cross-border collaborations, to be elevated as the world's design capital for a full year, and not be just one city, but both cities. I think has the potential of really taking our region to the next level. And I hope to come back and chat with you some more about it after we defeat that other city that doesn't got a chance against our binational mega region.
Well, thanks. We will look forward to that conversation and wish San Diego Tijuana good luck in that competition. Great to hear about Otay Mesa East. In a past life, I did some work on that project, so nice to hear that it's going forward. And I think, as you say, just another of many examples of our cross-border cooperation, not only in the mega region, but up and down the border. But maybe we could shift gears a little bit in terms of travel. We've been talking really more about, I think, more about northbound travel in our conversation. Some, though, in terms of southbound travel, some have proposed that Mexico adopt a testing or vaccination requirement for tourists. And I'm wondering if Farid and Maria Julia, from your different perspectives, Maria Julia more as a health professional, Farid more as a Mexican government official, is there any thought to actually implementing some sort of a restriction on travel into Mexico? And maybe Maria Julia, what are your thoughts on whether that would make an appreciable difference to controlling the virus?
Yes, thank you, Andrew, for the question. I definitely will let Farid talk about what Mexico has in the works. I'm very familiar with what the position is here and what the position has been. But just, travel is an important issue. I totally hear what the mayor has said. I totally hear what Farid has said. I'm not going to speak or give answers on behalf of our government, but it's definitely a very critical issue. And there are things that we're doing together. We have a bilateral working group where we're looking carefully at these travel restrictions or travel protocols, and really looking at the epidemiological issues, looking at mobility, looking at where we are with the situation, because when we started these conversations a couple of months ago, we were in a completely different epidemiological situation, and we were more confident that we were going in the right direction in terms of the virus not spreading really badly. Vaccination rates becoming more and more similar on both sides of the border, which is definitely an important issue. And all of a sudden, our conversations got really impacted by the variant and the epidemiological situation changing in both countries quite dramatically. So I think that the important issue here is to say that there is a dialogue, and all these issues that the mayor is talking about in terms of the economical impact to the region, the impact in our societies, people that need just to cross on daily basis to take the kids to the kindergarten and work on the other side and come back, and the delays and the interruption of normal life. And as I say, the epidemiological situation. We've been working with Farid and his team and our colleagues from Homeland Security and the DHS Center of Excellence at the University of Texas to really look at the mobility patterns and the impact on the epidemic. And, we're finding some interesting data that I don't want to right now comment publicly, because again, Delta has changed all this. Delta has changed our analysis in the last 2 months. So the dialogue is happening. The dialogue is very close. And I just want to also mention that in terms of what the mayor said at the beginning, one of the things that happened, in my humble opinion, is that, when the decisions needed to be made a year and a half ago in terms of border and travel border, we didn't necessarily have all the systems in place to have quick access to the information that allow us to do like a very, very careful analysis of, the situation on both sides of the border, the mobility of the populations. And you probably remember a bunch of articles saying that, we have the risk of Mexican crossing to the US side looking for healthcare, or the other way around. We had some data showing our, American citizens and residents traveling back to Mexico and then back to the United States, But in reality, it was very hard to have the hard data to say, this is what's going on. So as part of our efforts to collaborate with Mexico, and at the beginning of COVID, we signed a cooperative agreement for $3 million to enhance surveillance capacity, laboratory capacity, risk communications. But a fourth pillar that we put in there was to conduct a joint study of the mobility of the migrant populations. And when I talk about migrants, I don't necessarily mean just migrants coming from Central America, but also the populations that live at the border and how they move from one side to the other, and understand, how that daily movement impact the land border, travel and tourism. So everyone that moves at the border is something that we are studying very closely right now. So hopefully this will allow us also to set the basis to have that information really accessible in the future. So I don't know if that answers your questions, Andrew, but yeah, we're looking at this closely, and I'll let Farid answer in terms of Mexican restrictions for travel.
Thank you, Maria Julia. First of all, of course, we shared the concerns that Mayor Todd Gloria explained. Many of these families that have been affected are also Mexican families, or maybe they're not Mexican, but they are from Mexican origin, and they send remittances to our country. So the impact of this measure is not only for the U.S. but also for Mexico. I have here one figure that the San Isidro Chamber of Commerce estimates its business lost more than 644 million in sales and 1,900 jobs between March 2020 and March 2021. So of course there's an impact. But we also understand that at the federal level, there might be some other variables that have to be taken into account. And that's why I said in my introduction that constant dialogue is critical, because as the US government, if the US government tells us why are they concerned, we can then reply to them, well, maybe you shouldn't be so concerned because this and that. And some other concerns might be also legitimate, and we totally understand them. So this working group that we have with the US government for us is it's very helpful, and we really appreciate it, because this decision is a domestic decision, and they could take the decision without listening to us. And instead of taking that position, they have agreed to have a conversation, a candid conversation with us that, as Maria Julia was saying, is very candid. I spoke with them at 11 a.m. today. So what Maria Julia is saying, it's very right. And in terms of the position of the Mexican government, it's pretty clear. We really advocate for the IHR, the International Health Regulations of the World Health Organization, which basically say that restricting the travel has no impact in the spread of a pandemic when the spread is already in your country. So as of today, there is no plans of implementing restrictions to people coming to Mexico.
Thanks. Thank you, both of you. Those are really helpful answers. I hope. Again, if anyone has questions, we're happy to take them. But I have lots, so I will keep going. But let's maybe shift gears a little bit, Mayor Gloria, and talk a little bit about the future, about lessons learned, and maybe you could share some thoughts, perhaps yours or not formally on behalf of Mayor Ruiz, but maybe what do border mayors think might be some things that the government could do either at the federal, state, local level to prepare us better for a future pandemic?
Yeah. Well, Andrew, your head's where mine is as well. You know, if we have to live through this, let's try and learn from it. And I think that certainly our vaccination efforts, the collaboration that's happened there is something that we should do an after action on, figure out what worked well, what didn't, and improve upon it. This certainly will not be the last outbreak of any kind that we'd anticipate, maybe nothing on the scale, God willing, ever again. But we need to be prepared, recognizing that the virus certainly hasn't respected the border, right? It does not care what port of entry, if it's going north or south, either way, it's here, it's both of our problems, and we have to deal with it. And I've been really impressed by our collaboration that's happening, and that should be something that becomes more commonplace. I think the opportunities that I've had to meet with my counterparts in the health world on the Mexican side has allowed me to be a better advocate in Sacramento and Washington. Often the conversations have entailed, the mayor and mayors, the governor of Baja and others, getting down to that lower level, I want to say lower, but you get my point, further down the org chart of people who are practitioners doing this work. Again, it's allowed me to be a far better advocate when talking about reopening our borders. And I would endeavor to try and continue those kinds of conversations because I think it helps make me a better advocate for the binational region. Beyond that, we have the existing challenges that are here. I mean, I will tell you that the cross-border sewage flows that we have are a health crisis, right? Ask any surfer in Imperial Beach or Coronado, the health impacts of our failure to properly invest in our binational pollution infrastructure. I think that, if we're going to get aggressive with COVID-19, let's get aggressive on those things that are causing swimmers to get sick, as a consequence for our beaches to be closed. And Andrew, you can imagine, while there's nothing that really compares to the closure of our border in terms of economic impact, when our beaches are closed, many of our beach serving businesses also close. That has tremendous impacts. And that's not a once a century thing. That can be multiple times a month. And so it's a real challenge to try and take this lesson learned, this silver lining, if there is any such thing through this whole pandemic, and try and use it to address other long-standing concerns, as well as having the infrastructure in place for the next time we have to cross this with this particular challenge.
Right. I think that's exactly right. Maria Julia, that leads to another sort of long-term question. Maybe we could talk to the extent to which the Border Health Commission would have a role in addressing things like the sewage flow issue that the mayor mentioned, or other health issues that affect not only the Cali-Baja region, but up and down the entire border.
Thank you so much for the question, Andrew. As you know, I've been designated as the acting director very recently. And one of the things that we're talking with the members and with HHS leadership is really to strengthen the role of the commission as an advisory body and give a voice to these local authorities and the experts, as the mayor were saying, on the ground, the people that are experiencing that and the practitioners that are finding the local solutions to all the things, make their way to Washington. So I think that's a critical thing, and it's one of the things that was a challenge, I think, to speak very frankly, until not very recently. It was very hard to communicate things or communicate things up and turn what we were learning from the ground into policy action. And work in an integrated way from the local, the state, and the federal level. It was a little bit of these joint conversations there that we are focused now into changing and really bring the commission. I mean, the commission has been meeting, don't get me wrong, and has been an important, a critical source of interaction with those levels, even in the midst of the challenges. For example, very early on during the pandemic, we convened the commission and federal authorities from both sides, including CBP from our side, and obviously the National Institute of Migration, the Ministry of Health in Mexico, and look at our protocols for joint outbreak investigation that have been established in the past, and our guidelines for communications and notification of cases of mutual interest. So we immediately look at all that and saw and figure how to adapt it to COVID. And that actually really happened, at the beginning. We really sat down together and mapped, okay, how we did it in the past, so what the plan says, and now how that applies to COVID, given the limitations and the uncertainty at the beginning of the outbreak. But we really want to take that now to a different, if you wish, level, or a much more powerful level, where people at the local and the state level, through the commission, have an opportunity to do a very much data-based, evidence-based needs assessment, and then the opportunity to brief our HHS leadership on more regular basis and more directly. So at least that's my commitment as an acting director, and I know that my leadership is fully on board with that approach, and I hope that we can create that openness for that dialogue to happen. And of course, the beauty of the commission is that it allows for, the Board of Health Commissions has two sections, the US section and the Mexican section. So the commission allows for transversal dialogue among the border states on each side, and then for cross-border dialogue. And the beauty is that it has local state representatives and federal representatives. So hopefully now with the new administration and the new commitment, we can really improve that type of collaboration going forward, which is going to be essential. It's very essential. We have a lot to do in terms of surveillance protocols, in terms of determining, as you say, are we going to focus on the problems that the mayor talked about, or we want to focus on pandemic preparedness, the incidence of chronic diseases, the environmental challenges that we have. How do we do it? And we need to listen to the experts really on the ground.
Thanks. I think what you're talking about, it fits so well with the overall, I think, approach on the bilateral relationship, where we're going to have a renewed high-level economic dialogue, a security dialogue, and it certainly seems that through the Border Health Commission, there ought to be a bilateral health dialogue. As the mayor pointed out, the pandemic doesn't care what side of the border it's on, and as you've alluded to, we have many health challenges in common. Certainly, obesity and diabetes come to mind as two obvious ones.
Absolutely. And if you allow me one more second, and not to take too much time from my co-panelists, but really, for example, we were thinking chronic diseases, obesity, hypertension, diabetes on the one hand, and this group of people were not talking to the people working on pandemic preparedness. And we saw now, in particular, how our border region, which is one of the highest in the world with incidence of these diseases, how much and strongly they were affected by COVID because of these underlying chronic disease conditions. And then we saw, as Farid mentioned, one of the key topics that is keeping us from sleeping is as you were saying, there's no economic dialogue, there's no security if we don't take care of the health of the populations, because we saw our manufacturing plants closed, our borders closed because of the pandemic and the impact this is having. So supply chain is a huge issue for us moving forward, and at the border was especially important because of the closure. So back to you for questions. We can be speaking 2 days here, non-stop.
Thank you. Well, there's always lots to talk about in these types of issues, and Farid, maybe we'll sort of change gears a little bit since you have economic responsibilities as well as vaccine procurement responsibilities in your job. Maybe you could share some thoughts, if you like, on the Mexican government or SRE's thoughts looking forward on what we can do to strengthen the cross-border economy.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, when I was appointed at this direction general, I was appointed as Director for Economic Affairs, but I think I'll change my card to Director of Health Bilateral Issues or something like that. In terms of what can we do? Well, this pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons. And one of the most important lessons, as Maria Julia was slightly saying, is to avoid an interruption of the regional supply chains. As you all know, our production is regional. There are some parts of the vehicles that cross the border 7 times before they arrive to be a final product. And the problem arises when we do not have the same considerations when it comes to critical sectors. And that was actually the first big problem we had. And that's how I met Maria Julia, because for the US, the critical sectors were a lot. They have a list published by CISA that enlists a lot of sectors, and all of them would remain open during the pandemic. And the Mexican government had a narrower list. So just by having one sector in the list of CISA and not having it in the Mexican list, you have a massive disruption in the global production, in the regional production. And I think that we have to really work a lot to have an harmonized list of what's critical and what's not critical. Because we also have to consider that the capacities of each country are different, and the capacity of response to a pandemic is different. And opening a sector impacts hospitalizations, cases, and some other variables. So there's, as The Economist published it in its cover, a glimpse calculus of how much you can open and how much you cannot. So I'm certain that this item, for example, will be included in the HLED because it's of extreme importance for both countries. And we also have to think a lot in the nearshoring, the reshoring, and the recent term that has been coined ally shoring. Because during a pandemic, you will prioritize your population. It's normal. Well, maybe liberals don't think it's normal, but realists do. Maybe in a pandemic, they both agree. And this has a series of consequences globally. So, for example, when we analyze the geopolitical scenario, we really have to think that, are we really very integrated as a region that we do not depend on other allies, that if they decide not to sell us something, we'll keep producing our goods? And I think that's a question that the US government posed to themselves, and they published an executive order of 100 days, etc. And Mexico, being its strongest ally, can really insert the country into that discussion. The critical sectors, the advanced batteries, advanced packaging, rare minerals, chips. Of course, we can do a lot together to become a stronger region in terms of economic, critical supply chains amidst a geopolitical context that's not always auspicious for the region as a whole.
Thank you. That's great. Duncan mentioned earlier in our last panel that the Wilson Center has an initiative on supply chains in some of those critical areas, specifically the ones you mentioned. And I think to some extent what this comes down to is, are we thinking about the United States or are we thinking about North America? And what you're alluding to certainly is that we should be thinking about North America. Mayor Gloria, Farid talked about the challenge when the border first closed, the different definitions of essential industry and the disruption that caused. Are you seeing, our San Diego businesses sort of seeing that shake out now, so that while people aren't crossing for tourism and non-essential work, that essential flows are essentially back to normal, or are there still hiccups that need to be addressed?
No, I think there's still hiccups, and maybe folks would disagree, but the numbers I quoted earlier in terms of economic impact, that isn't just leisure travel, right? That's a lot of folks, and some of that could just be folks that are like a lot of us trying to figure this all out. Maybe you're still dealing with childcare issues, or maybe you haven't been called back to work in person. Some of those things, but a lot of it has to deal with the restrictions. I mean, certainly trade is occurring. There are essential services that are happening, but it isn't at full tilt. And that's a part of why we've been so outspoken. And candidly, with not a lot to show for it yet. We get these once a month extensions of the closure. Really, at this point, what we're asking for are metrics. What vaccination rates do we need to hit? Infection rates, other things. Could we, I think maybe what you're alluding to, could we, expand classifications even slightly to get more throughput? I mean, this would be constructive feedback that we would welcome, recognizing, I think Fareed said it before, there's a lot of stuff above my pay grade. I'm just a mayor. I'm just here trying to run the 8th largest city in the country. And the geopolitical, international, national level concerns, that's not what I do. But I know for a mayor, it's the meat and potatoes of governance. And a lot of it comes down to just give me some targets to aim for. You want 80% vaccination rate, 90%. You want a infection rate below 3%, 2%, whatever the case may be. We could work with that. But back to your original question, Andrew, yes, there is a flow. Is it what it normally should be? No, it is not. And it won't be until these restrictions are lifted. The message is sent, right? That's a part of our problem. And, it gives an impression that we're still closed in some way. And as I mentioned earlier, we are welcoming tourism back to our convention center after more than a year and a half of it being closed. It helps, erodes my messaging to the general public, both here in San Diego and abroad, that we're open for business when you can't freely cross at the border.
Absolutely, and I think you didn't. These are my words, not yours. But I think the reality is that because of where you're located, international issues are your issues in ways that are different than if you're the mayor of no matter the size of the city. Internal.
We have great friends and colleagues who represent cities that are not quite on the border, but
right.
They don't have these experiences that we have to experience, and that's a part of why participating in forums like these are important to me. This is a bully pulpit from which we can articulate. I don't run the Homeland Security Department or Border Patrol or whatever, but I can hopefully use the platform the people of the city have given me to try and influence that. And again, grateful for this opportunity, Andrew.
Great. Well, and actually, we have a question from the audience that dovetails well with that. The 3rd U.S. Mexico Mayor's Summit will be hosted in San Diego, Tijuana in 2022. What binational issues and topics would you like to see covered at future binational gatherings? And that's for you.
For me, okay. I'm just marveling at the idea of having an in-person conference. Just hoping that we can actually do that. It's in.
It didn't say when in 2022.
Yeah. As a native San Diegan, it's just in our DNA. We like welcoming people to town. So I sort of get thirsty at the idea of that coming to our city, our region. Andrew, I think it actually goes back to what you were saying a moment ago. I'm responsible for picking up garbage and getting water to people's homes and sewage away from their homes. But these additional duties as assigned, which I gleefully take on. I love the fact that I get to be the mayor of the largest border city in the United States. But how we pioneer that, particularly as you see more subnational cooperation. As a member of the state legislature, I traveled multiple times to Mexico City to advocate on behalf of California. There were national reasons why that was necessary. I served from 2016 to 2020. But I think that I would appreciate the opportunity to understand the more strategic ways that I can be helpful in advancing this dialogue. Even in San Diego, we have a lot of misunderstandings about the border. We may be here on it, but in terms of people's susceptibility to I'm not gonna say the word right, are susceptible to the suggestion that the border is a liability, that it breeds crime or something. I know some of the intuitive responses to that, but I think conferences like this can we put our heads together and think of ways to use these platforms to better benefit. I think the other part of it is understanding from my colleagues in Mexico. I know what the U.S. government can bring to bear. I know what the state government can bring to bear. I'm still very much learning how to navigate the Mexican bureaucracy and to do that in a mutual benefit. People in roles like mine, we have practitioners who are here that are running agencies and doing important work. But the opportunities I have to sit with Governor Newsom or to meet with Vice President Harris, being able to make sure that we're leveraging each other's resources, I think that's very much what the future is about. It's no one color of money. It's a little bit of everybody, and to the extent that it's from both sides of the border, that's how OTI 2 is going to get done. I think that a better fluency on the way that the Mexican government is formed and how it works and how I as an American official can help influence it, that also would be, I think, beneficial.
Excellent. Let me go to Fareed. A really broad question, and maybe sort of responding to the mayor. How, what's the Mexican federal government's view, I guess, of the kind of engagement that he's talking about, and what might be some ways that Mayor Gloria and other U.S. mayors could best engage with the Mexican government at all levels.
Let me begin saying that for the Mexican foreign policy, the engagement with the subnational actors is essential. We have a whole direction general named political coordination that has this constant dialogue with mayors, with the governors, and with also the Congress and the local congresses as well. So we have a constant dialogue with these local authorities. And we do have this relationship between the Mexican government and the local authorities in Mexico, and the Mexican government and the local authorities in the US. And that's where our network of consulates really shines. And I know that there are some consuls generals connected here, and let me congratulate you for all the effort that you've done, because it really comes to them when we speak about the relationship between Mexico and the US. And in these consulates, they have what is called ventanillas de salud, the health windows, that their purpose is to precisely make some partnerships or alliances with local authorities or local institutions. And these windows are coordinated by the by the IME, the Institute for Mexicans Abroad. And they've done a great job when it comes to vaccination, for example. As of the 26th of July, the local level, more than 80, no, sorry, this is not the right figure. As of July 26th, 93,000 vaccines have been administered with the help of our consulates. And we can disaggregate this in two ways: 39,000 in the facilities of the consulates and 54,000 in local partners' spaces. Of course, there are some consulates that have done a massive job. For example, in Orlando have been applied around 14,000 vaccines, which is a lot. So we do have a lot of engagement with the local authorities, with the local institutions as well, universities, etc. So this is something that's very important for us, and I hope that, of course, there's always something we can do more, but I think we are on the right track.
Excellent. Well, I like finishing up on a positive note, and we are just about at time. So I think what I'll do is thank Mayor Gloria and Fareed Hanan and Maria Julia Marinison for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. I think you've raised some really interesting topics and points, and I think there are certainly some themes that have carried through the entire afternoon. And I will thank the panel and ask my colleague Duncan if he wants to make just some final wrap-up comments for this afternoon.
Thanks, Andrew, and congratulations on putting together what was a fantastic first day of the Border Forum this year. Yeah, and with regards to those recurring themes, I think that the one thing that I take away from listening to the conversations is the need for more conversations. Information flow, making sure that there is greater understanding in the nation's capitals and other decision-making centers about what the reality is like at the border has been a recurring theme throughout the life of this Border Forum over the last 7 years or so. And I think that now it's more important than ever that we not only keep that going, but that we invest more heavily in it. So I'm very, very grateful to all of the participants today. We're looking forward to an incredible day tomorrow. We have the kickoff at 3 p.m. again. Senator Mike Crapo of Idaho will be speaking. And then we have the lessons for the U.S.-Mexico border from the U.S.-Canada Border Working Group, which have been run by the Wilson Center's Canada Institute. And then looking at our closing panel, revitalizing the cross-border economy, forward-looking and thinking about many of the issues that we've already been brought up today, but from the perspective of some of the most important folks who are actually in the field dealing with this. So, Andrew, Britton, thank you so much for letting me play a part today. It's been a terrific event. I will go back to my my field research here in the city of Vancouver, and I look forward to watching and listening to tomorrow's event. Thanks, everybody, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.